Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hire the Right Fit Employee Every Time. And I do mean right fit. That's the most important part of this process. My name is Amy Castro, and I hope today to share with you some of the things that I've learned in more than 20 years of not only consulting and working and training with pet business professionals, but also in the corporate and government arena. Because when it comes to hiring, everybody faces very similar challenges. And even for me in my own business, and even for me in my nonprofit work, the challenge of finding the right people for the right jobs on your team is something that we all, I think, struggle with. And so I'm hoping that I will bring that experience to the table today and help you the next time you hire somebody to get that just right person for any job that you're hiring within your organization or your business. So if you're like me, you've probably experienced, and there was a reason I had a frog on my first slide. You've probably experienced what I call the frog prince phenomenon when it comes to hire. And you may or may not be familiar with the story of the frog prince, but the basic premise is that there was a prince who got turned into a frog. And the only way that the prince could get turned back into a prince is if he found his true love, his perfect match. And I think for those of us, when we're in a position of hiring, we experience the frog prince phenomenon, but we kind of experience it in reverse, and it's not very good. It's not very pretty. What happens is we think we found that perfect match, the perfect person for the job, because the interview went so well, and they were so nice and so bubbly and knowledgeable. We think we've got that great match. And then the first day of the job, a frog shows up and you're like, what the heck happened? How is it that that person that I saw the other day is completely changed when it comes to the first day of the job? And there's a lot of reasons for that. That's what we're going to talk about. But the bottom line is you can't fix it. There is no magic wand. There is nothing magical you can do that's going to turn that frog back into a prince. You're going to be stuck with the frog until you figure out a way to get rid of the frog. And then you're going to feel like this. And I know I've been there. You've probably been there. And nobody wants to be feeling like this. Beyond the fact that you're going to feel like crying, there is a big price that we pay in any business when we hire the wrong person. And you've all probably experienced it. You may not have thought about it or really brought it down to this granular level, but there's a lot of rework. You've got to now start the whole process all over again. You've got to put those ads back out and spend more money. And realize that the money is not just the money you spent on ads or paying for some training. Money comes in the form of loss of productivity. So every extra minute that you spend, your manager spends on, or your team spends interviewing, re-interviewing, is a loss of productivity, a loss of money, and a loss to your business. You also will find when you hire the wrong person, and especially if you consistently make mistakes and you have high turnover, your team is going to just disengage. They're going to not really even acknowledge that new person because they're never going to last more than a couple of days, and they'll start getting that feeling and that attitude. But another thing that oftentimes we don't think about is what happens to our customers when we constantly have the trainee working in the job, and next week we've got another one, and 2 weeks from now we've got the same thing going. You know, your customers are going to be unhappy. Usually they're pretty accepting of somebody in training, but they don't want to deal with trainees in everything that they do in your business. So there's a price that we pay when we make those poor choices. And probably the biggest price that a lot of times people don't think about it is, and this is, you can Google it. It's true that when you make bad hiring decisions, bad employees are going to drive good employees away. If I'm a good employee and I know that I can get a job anywhere, then I'm not going to stick around and put up with your bad hires. I'm going to quit and I'm going to move on where people have a well-oiled machine and a good team that I get to work with. So I don't think you're wanting to pay that price. I know I don't want to pay that price in my business. So what is it we can do to make sure that this doesn't happen to us? And basically, there's about 4 things that we need to do to make sure that we are finding that right fit person. Number 1, you got to know why you're attracting the wrong people. What are we doing wrong? You also have to look at your interview questions. I think people make a lot of mistakes in the questions that they ask in interviews, and we're going to get into some detail on that. You also have to really take time to develop good interview questions. You can't just go out and look up some interview questions and use those in your job. You can't just ask interview questions that you've been asking for the last 20 years, and we'll talk about why. And last but not least, I'm going to highly encourage you, and I'm going to give you some tips and some tools for doing this, is to break through that prince or princess that they're trying to show you in that job interview to make sure there's not a frog hiding underneath. And you're going to do that with behavior-based or behavioral interviewing questions. So we're going to go through each one of these things so that we all know exactly what we need to do to improve this hiring process. So first thing in finding the right person is really looking at, why do we attract wrong people, right? So one of the things that comes up a lot for me when I'm working with clients is I'm shocked at how many people don't have written job descriptions that say, here's the position, here are their responsibilities, here are their goals and objectives, and here are the specific tasks that they do in their job on a regular basis to achieve that goal. You've got to have job descriptions for every single position in your organization. Otherwise, number 1, how do you even know if somebody's doing a good job if you don't really know what the job is? And number 2, how can they even strive to do a good job if they don't know what it is they're specifically supposed to be doing? So make sure you take the time to get those job descriptions written if you haven't done it already. And you know what? Just a little sidebar tip here. The best person to help you get that done is the person that's currently in the job. Let them tell you what they spend their time on. Another thing is, when I find that people sometimes do have job descriptions, I find that they're oftentimes very outdated. Okay, you can't have the same job description from 10 years ago. And for some of you, depending upon the growth and acceleration in your business and how much technology has changed, how much your processes have changed, you may have to update your job descriptions once a year. It's worth at least looking at them on a regular basis. Once a year is probably great. And certainly looking at them before you go and put an ad out to hire somebody for that job to say, is this really an accurate reflection of what somebody's going to be spending their time on in the job? And keep in mind, with writing a job description, it does not need to include every single thing the person's ever going to do, especially those kind of out there every once in a while things. But it should include the things that they're going to spend the majority of their time on. So make sure that you include that information in those job descriptions in order of the time spent and the importance. So if I'm going to be spending 60% of my time doing a particular task in the job, that should probably be pretty high in the job description, not buried down below somewhere. I actually had somebody the other day, I was reviewing their job descriptions, and the job description actually said, must know how to save content to floppy disks. I can guarantee you that there are probably some people listening and watching this presentation today that don't even know what a floppy disk is because they're so old and they do not exist anymore. And so why would that be in anybody's job description? That needs to be updated. Another reason that we don't hire the right people or that we attract the wrong people to a job is we don't know what the right person looks like. We don't have a clear picture of the ideal, not perfect, but the ideal person that you want in that position. You also have to think about the ads, and we're gonna go into more detail on that ideal person as we go along. So I don't mean to skim over that too quickly, but we'll get into that. Another reason we attract the wrong person is because our ads are not very attractive. As a matter of fact, just a couple of years ago, Inc. magazine stressed in an article about hiring that you really need to look at your ad as something that your goal is to get the right person to apply. That means you have to attract the right person to the position. Many times people think about a job ad as the other way around. Like, I'm not looking to attract the right person. I want to make sure I don't get the wrong people. So I'm going to tell them all the things that they have to have so that the wrong person doesn't make it through. And that ends up making some really bad ads along the way. So here's just an example of an ad that I saw recently. And I actually know this business, and they actually allowed me, because I helped them for free to redo their ad. They allowed me to share this picture. And it has been changed a little bit to not identify them in case anybody knows them. But if you put out an ad that says experienced groomer wanted, spacious facility, all the latest equipment, and a person walks in and it's this very small, very tight grooming facility, they're not going to feel like you've told them the truth. So another reason we attract the wrong people is because we're not honest in our ads. I think we want to paint things in a positive light, but we also need to be honest, because if we oversell and underdeliver, that person's not going to stick around for very long anyway. So you want to make sure that you're honest, but also painting things in the best possible light. When I talked a little bit ago about this idea of, putting things in your job ads that drives people away, this is the kind of ad that I'm talking about. This ad here reads like a job description, and I don't want you to confuse a job description with your job ad. Okay, you're going to include elements of the job description in your ad, but again, your goal with the ad is to attract, to make your business sound like a place, if it is, that people want to work. So one that reads like this, that's kind of like a wanted sign: wanted, responsible for hospital maintenance, must be able to do this, must be able to do that. That's not going to attract an innovative, exciting person. That's going to attract a person who meets these bare minimum requirements and says, okay, I'm going to go for it. Because anybody that is innovative or wants to work with an exciting, energetic team is not going to be energized by an ad like this. So you got to jazz it up, bottom line. And again, balancing honesty with jazz. A couple of things that you can do just to kind of kick things off. And I want to give you some examples of ads that I personally thought were pretty innovative, and you don't have to take it this far, but are really attractive to the right people. So this is an ad for a copy editor. Okay, and you might never be hiring for a copy editor, but to take an ad and put typos in it and say, hey, if you can find the ads in this typos, you might be the person for our position. And just in case anybody cares where the typos are, we're going to go ahead and point those out. I mean, that's kind of creative. It would have been easy for them to say, wanted, copy editor, need to do this, need to do that. But this is a fun way to kick off a job announcement. What about somebody that's looking for somebody that's a good problem solver, or somebody that is an engineer? You put your telephone number in a math ad. I can tell you right now, I would not be applying for this position. I couldn't figure out these formulas, and that's great, because you don't want me. You don't want me working for you doing numbers. I couldn't stack a bunch of pennies and count the same number of pennies twice. That's not the job for me. But there's a lot of people who would be totally jazzed by an ad like this and say, hey, I definitely want to apply for this position. And by the way, I can do this formula. This is probably one of my favorites. It was a school district out in California that was looking for school bus drivers. So they took advantage of their buses and they put ads on the buses. So I mean, make $16.25 an hour doing what most parents do for free. Another one of the things that you'll never take your work home. As a matter of fact, it would be illegal. That's funny. And you know what? If you're going to be a bus driver, if any of y'all have ever driven a bus or put up with 40 kids at the same time, you better have a good sense of humor, because otherwise your head's going to pop off probably. So it's an opportunity in this instance to not only use a little bit of humor to attract the right person, but think about when school buses are driving around. If you see school buses driving around, that means you're around when school buses are around. Maybe you have time to drive a school bus. So there's a lot that factors into our ads, not only just making them appealing, but think about where you're placing those ads. Are you putting them where the people you want to attract hang out? If you're not, you're never going to find them. So this is an example, and this was for veterinary practice that I think would get the right person's attention. They were looking for somebody who was caring, who worked well in a team, who was very customer oriented, who cared about detail and documentation because they were a specialty veterinary practice. This ad is more attractive than the wanted ads. You know, it's going to draw somebody who is tired of kind of a routine rote job and somebody that's looking for a challenge in a team environment where details are important. If that's who you want to attract, then your ad can say that. So really think about when you're looking at who am I trying to attract? Who is that ideal candidate? And where am I going to find them? And what are the appeals that are going to draw them in to at least come for an interview? That's the first step. You're not necessarily going to commit them to the job from the ad because that's what the interview's for, but you're going to get them to at least apply, and that's super important. Tip number 2 for finding the right fit employee is to get rid of those interview questions that are, in my personal opinion, a complete and utter waste of time. And what I mean by that are those interview questions that you might be asking that are either unnecessary to the position or to your organization, to your business, or are so common that everybody asks them. And so therefore it has nothing really to do with the job you're hiring for. It's just a generic interview question. And here's how you know, and know that your questions are bad, number 1. And number 2, this is one of the biggest reasons that you get that prince and princess phenomenon at the interview, but the frog shows up. Because as a matter of fact, it will take that prince or princess 1.11 seconds to get on Google and ask the question, what are the most common interview questions and how should I answer them? And they will get almost 1 billion answers to that question. So if I can go out as your candidate and do some homework, not on your business, not on how it's unique, not on how it's different, but what are the interview questions I'm going to get asked when I apply for a job as a groomer, and I can get hundreds of thousands of answers, and you are using that same Google search to draw your questions, you're going to get an answer that is basically Google, not Amy Castro, who is applying for your job. That's not who you're hiring. So you've really got to take some time, or at least I highly recommend that you take some time to develop questions that are specific to your organization. So get rid of questions that ask things like, what is your greatest strength? You know what you're going to hear when you get, what is your greatest strength? You're going to get, I'm so dedicated to my job. I love people. I love animals. Is it true? Maybe. But doesn't necessarily mean that that is what I need. You know, and you've all done it. You've hired that person that says they love animals, but there's a lot more to being successful in your business than loving animals. Another personal favorite, what's your greatest weakness? What I heard the last time I asked this question and realized, probably not a good question. The person said, my greatest weakness is I am so dedicated to my job that sometimes I forget to go home at the end of the day. Really? I mean, I guess that's possible, but more than likely, you probably searched somewhere and Google told you to take a strength and turn it into a weakness, and dedication to your job might be a good example. So not really good to ask these. These are Googleable questions. Why should we hire you? You know, you should be able to figure out that on your own in an interview. And again, that's somebody that they're going to be able to Google that question and get the answer to it. What would your last employer say about you? If you want to know, ask their last employer. That's where you're going to find out the true answer to that question. Have you worked in retail before? Well, that's a waste of time. That's what your application should be telling you, or a resume. Where have you worked in the past? Ditto, application, resume. And then my personal favorite is the, let me see how they respond under stress. Or how do they respond to answering a dumb question? If you could be a tree, what kind of tree would you be? Or if you could describe yourself as any particular dog breed, what would it be? Probably not necessary. I mean, you might learn a little bit about somebody's personality in that way, but I would rather you spend your time asking them some specific questions about what it takes to be successful in the job that you're hiring. So that's where we transition into this idea of developing our own questions. We are looking for you. We want to find the right fit person. Let's develop those right fit questions. And it's going to take some time and it's going to take some effort, but it doesn't have to be you alone doing it. You can involve your team in this process. And I highly recommend that you do. So here are some things that you need to consider in developing the right kinds of questions for your interviews. The first thing that you want to do is you want to figure out, what does it take for somebody to fit here? Okay. Here, meaning in this job, with my customers, in my business, with my team, what does it take to fit? And I am not looking for you to search for clones of existing employees. But back in the beginning, when I said we're going to elaborate on this a little bit more about the ideal applicant, I think looking at what makes your good employees good for you, for the job, for your business, for your team, and getting the answers to that question will help you find people who will also have a similar fit with your organization. Not clones, but somebody that's going to fit. And fit tends to fall into one of three categories, okay? Knowledge, what do they need to know to be successful? What do they need to be able to do? Skill. And how well do they need to do it? Ability. So I'm just going to use this as an example. And I'm going to ask you, even though I won't know if you're not really doing it, but I'm going to ask you to do it anyway, because if we were live and together, I would ask you to do it. Okay. So we're starting with knowledge, right? So there is a vehicle that a human being is sitting on in all three pictures. If you know what that is, I want you to stand up. This would be a good chance for you to stretch, right? We're about halfway through or so. Stand up if you know what this is and stay standing, okay? So my guess is that pretty much all of you are standing up because you know that's some type of motorcycle, some kind of dirt bike. And we can delve down into looking for narrower knowledges, like knowledge. So if I said to you, what model dirt bike is this? How many, if you know that, keep standing, then many of you would probably sit down. So for every job, you're going to identify the level of knowledge, all right? Second thing is skill. So hopefully you're all still standing. So if you know how to ride a motorcycle or a dirt bike, stay standing. If you don't, go ahead and sit. Now, if I was in the audience right now, if I was watching this presentation, I would be sitting down. I don't know how to, I don't want to know how. So if I sat down and I don't have the skill that you need for the job, then that eliminates people that you need to consider for hire. But here's where it gets a little bit tricky, is the ability. How well do I need to be able to demonstrate that skill? And grooming is a great example of that. I mean, there are a lot of people who can cut hair. There are not a lot of people who can do a great cut in a particular breed. A teddy bear cut, for example, some people are really, really good at it, and some people are okay at it, and some people are very mediocre at it. What is the ability level to do that you need in your business for that particular position? Okay, because it might be different for a grooming assistant than it is for your head groomer. So knowledge, skills, and ability. So just to close this, so everybody can probably sit down. If you have the ability to ride a dirt bike at a championship level in racing, remain standing. And my guess would be, if I wish you were here, because there's probably one or two of you that are like, yeah, I've done that. But the vast majority of you have not done that. And you're probably not capable of that. And that one or two last human beings standing, that's the person you want to hire. That's the person that's not the prince or princess that says they know what a motorcycle is. That's the person that can actually do what you need them to do. And your interview questions will help you find that person if you spend the time in defining the knowledge, the skill, and the ability that a person needs to have for each position in your organization. So one of the things that you're going to want to do in this process is you're going to take that knowledge, the skills, the abilities that you need for that position, and you're going to create what I call a great employee profile. And what you're going to do is you're going to start looking at your top employees, maybe your top one or two employees, And you're going to work with them to identify the KSA, knowledge, skills, and ability. But I also want you to realize that that's usually not the thing that makes or breaks an employee's success. It's the intangible things that oftentimes are an issue. It's the employee who has that great skill in grooming, but has a terrible attitude towards human beings, and they don't know how to communicate effectively with them. So you're going to want to look beyond just technical skills and look at things like a person's attitudes about things. And what kind of an attitude do you need to be successful? What kind of values do you need to work with humans and animals? What personality elements do those great employees that you have, what personality elements do they possess that are completely relevant to them being successful in the job? And you want to roll some questions in about that. So this great employee profile is going to be a nice, well-rounded picture of the right employee for the right position in your business. And it's really important. Again, it's time consuming, but it is really important to spend the time to paint this picture. And again, get your employees to help with that. They know what it takes to be successful in the job, and they can help you in developing these questions. So some of the fit factors that you might want to take into consideration that are specific to your business itself. So that's kind of the environmental element. Is physical environment. Is it big, spacious, and roomy, or is it small and we have to work really physically close together? What is the emotional from a stress standpoint? Is your business relatively slower paced, or is it very, very fast paced and high pressure? And I won't go through all of these, but these are all things that you're going to want to consider when you're looking at people for new opportunities in your organization. If you have a veterinary practice, is it large animal or small animal? Is it a huge practice or a small, rural or urban? All of these things can play into the type of person who's going to be happy and successful in your business. So make sure that you are considering that as the umbrella factor for all of the people that are working under that umbrella in your business. Then you're going to be ready to write the questions. All right. So you're going to create those questions that are going to identify, again, the characteristics of the person, the knowledge, skills, and ability, and how do they fit into your business. And it is a pretty simple formula that you can follow to do that. You're going to take those questions and you're going to identify questions that will ask and identify and pull out of those employees those characteristics, that knowledge, those skills, those abilities, and the fit. But this is the piece that people forget. How do you know if you've gotten a good answer, a great answer, or an answer? Most of the time we go with our gut when we do that. And the problem is when we get to the end of interviewing a bunch of employees, we've forgotten what our gut said about the first applicant, the third applicant. Maybe we didn't take such great notes. Maybe we're having a time trying to tell the difference between two that are relatively close. So one of the things that you're going to want to do for every question you create, you're going to want to create benchmark responses. You're basically going to have to answer your own questions. And you're going to have to answer them in one of three ways. You want to identify what would be a pretty poor answer to this question. So what would I not want to hear come out of that person's mouth? So that would be what would be an unsatisfactory answer. Then you're going to say, okay, what is the minimum entry requirement? Like, this would be a really good answer. If I heard this, I would be happy. This person could move on to the next step. They would be a good fit for the question and for the position. And then you want to separate out what are the exceptional, what are the great answers, what are the things that would be the icing on the cake. Boy, if I heard that, that's going to make that person stand out from the good people. And each one of those things, as you see on your screen, each one of those answers that you create is going to have a score. And the score is going to tally up to the employee, or the applicant's overall score for the interview. And what that does is that gives you some quantifiable black and white information to make your hiring decisions that you probably don't have right now, and you're just going with your gut. And the bottom line is your gut is going to have a hard time finding that right person when that right person is not really showing themselves super effectively. So let me just give you an example of this. If you asked a question, because dealing with unhappy customers is an important skill, and you have to have a certain attitude to deal with unhappy customers. If you're going to ask a question about unhappy customers, like, tell me about a time when your customer was checking out and they were unhappy about their total bill. What did you do and say? And what was the outcome? All right. So what you would have to do, if that's your interview question, is you're going to have to identify, what would be a poor answer. So I certainly don't want to hear, if I was hiring for somebody that is going to be a team lead or an assistant manager, and they said, well, I really struggle dealing with unhappy people, so I just go to my manager and let them handle it. I would give that a 1. That's not the answer that I want to hear from an assistant manager. And in fact, that's probably not the answer that I want to hear from anybody who's got any experience in the position that I'm hiring for. Your score number 3, that good answer might be that they remain calm. I try to remain calm. I try to listen really well. I try to repeat what the customer has said to show that I've understood it. And, if I can't help them, then I go get my manager. So that's a much better answer than the first answer. And then maybe your exceptional answer would be a person who said, well, people are oftentimes unhappy if their bill is unexpected. So I've always made it a point of giving them, and again, within parameters, giving them an estimate in advance so there's no surprises at the end, explaining their bill in detail when they check out so that they understand the charges. I listen, I empathize, I'll tell them this. And so, maybe that's a superior answer to that number 3 answer, and you're going to score that a 5. Keep in mind when you're doing benchmarks that you don't have to write out a scripted answer. What I try to do is, for each of those scoring sets on my score sheet, I write out some key words or key concepts that I want to hear in order to assign that score. And that way, because not every person is going to give the answer the exact same way, but there are some key things that you're going to want to hear in those responses, and you can kind of just check those off. And in the end, for each question, you'll see, wow, there's a lot of check marks in 3. I've only got 1 check mark in 5, and I've got none in 1. That was a 3 answer, and it's pretty easy to circle and score at that point. And finally, our last step to finding that right fit employee is the actual behavioral element of the questions themselves. You're going to crack that facade in the interview with what I call behavior-based questions. And the question that I just gave you was a good example of a behavior-based question. When I think about behavior-based questions, I think about questions that oftentimes start with the phrase, tell me about a time when, or give me an example of. What you're looking for is a demonstration of certain behavior in the past, because I'm of the belief that if somebody handled a customer effectively in the past, they are probably capable of handling a customer effectively now. So the belief that past behavior is a pretty good predictor of future performance is why we ask behavioral questions. The other reason why we like to use behavioral questions is it's not really something you can look on Google, because the questions you're going to ask are so specific to your business that there's not something that they could really Google. Yeah, I mean, I could probably Google a question, how do I answer a question about customer service? But if you give them a specific scenario, unhappy about the bill, unhappy at checkout, unhappy about a charge that they weren't forewarned about, that really requires that person to dig deep into their past experience and find a similar example. It's a lot harder to fake. It's also better, I think, to ask behavioral questions than to ask hypothetical questions, because hypothetical questions are the what ifs. And I like to think that if hypothetically something happened, that I would act in the right way. But we all know that we've seen things on the news, we've heard stories about people behaving badly or not doing what they were supposed to do. And most of them, they didn't think, oh, I'm going to do the wrong thing in that situation. Hypothetically, they thought they were going to do the right thing. But then when faced with that scenario, if I'm in front of a burning building, a lot of people would say, oh, I'd run out and, run into the building and rescue them. But would they really, if a building was on fire? That you won't really know until you've been in that situation. That's why I want to know about the situations you've been in, not what you think you might do hypothetically. And so just a couple of quick examples of behavior-based questions. Tell me about a time when a customer was unhappy about the price of a product. Maybe you've got a product that has gone up in price. What did you say? What was the result? And I know these multi-part questions can be challenging to ask, but you can always ask as you go along. Tell me about a time. What did you say? Did you do anything else? And how did that turn out? You can ask it in stages. You don't have to expect the candidate to remember every single part of the question that you asked. Another example that you might use, tell me about a time when you had too many things to do and you had to prioritize your task. Again, you're not going to just ask this question of anybody, but if being able to prioritize tasks is critical for the job that you're hiring, then definitely that's a question that you want to ask. So when it comes to finding the right fit person, you want to make sure that you are following these 4 steps. Make sure you know why you're attracting the wrong person. Get rid of those silly questions that don't really do any good and don't really tell you anything about the other person. Make sure you're developing right fit questions with behavior-based questions. And one final tip I would give you too, don't interview alone. I like to have at least one other person in an interview and then look how our scores compare to each other's. I think it's very easy to let personal bias sometimes come into interviews. And if you have at least one other person in your interview with you, you have another perspective to add. So it could be, a manager, it could be an assistant manager, it could be your most experienced groomer if you're hiring for a groomer position. So I want to make sure that I'm not leaving you with too many unanswered questions or, with some challenges and wondering, how am I going to pull this all off? So what I want to offer you, if you text my name, Amy, to the telephone number on your screen, I'm going to send you 2 things. I'm going to send you a sample of multiple behavioral-based questions that assess different things. It could be time management, productivity, customer service skills, communication skills, so that you have some examples that you can use and maybe tweak specific to your business. I'm also going to send you, if you want it, a copy of the applicant evaluation form that I use, so you can see where am I doing those check marks and adding up those scores that I mentioned in the training today. So feel free to go ahead and send me a text for that information. Please do it within the next 30 minutes of watching this presentation, because then it will roll over to my next presentation and you're going to be getting something that has nothing to do with what we've talked about today. But I do wish you all the best of luck, and I think that at this point, I hope I've given you enough skills that you can stop kissing frogs and start finding the prince or princess that is truly right for any position in your organization. And thank you so much.